Let's talk about a company you've probably never heard of, but one that, I'm not kidding, holds the keys to our entire technological world. It's the silent architect behind literally every single microchip on the planet. Its name is ASML.
So, what if our whole technological future, I mean everything, from the AI revolution to the next phone you're going to buy, depended on a single choke point? Just one company. A company whose tech is so advanced, so unique, that without it, the relentless march of progress we take for granted would just grind to a halt.
Well, that company exists. It sits right at the heart of the entire semiconductor ecosystem, and it's the hidden power behind the giants we all know and love: Apple, NVIDIA, and the world's most advanced chipmaker, TSMC. It is the single, irreplaceable engine that makes their success even possible.
And here's the kicker, the real paradox. This company, ASML, has never, ever made a single computer chip. So how on earth did it become the most important company you've never heard of?
Well, the answer lies in solving one of the most ridiculously difficult engineering problems you can even imagine. It's all about printing with light on a scale that, honestly, just borders on impossible.
Okay, so at its core, every chip is like a tiny, impossibly dense city packed with billions of transistors, and the process of building this city is called photolithography. The best way to think of it is this. You're using light to project these microscopic blueprints, entire city maps, onto a piece of silicon, and you're etching in all the streets and all the buildings that will become the chip's circuits. The smaller and more precise your light beam is, the more advanced your city can be.
Now, making a chip is a really long and complicated journey, right? And it's got all of these steps, from the initial design all the way to the final packaging. But the absolute heart of the whole process, the one step that matters most, is step 3, lithography. This is the moment the chip's blueprint is physically created. It's the only step that determines how small and powerful a chip can be. In ASML, they don't just participate here, they completely own this step.
But, this kind of global dominance didn't just appear out of nowhere. The story of ASML is a classic tale of an underdog, a real David versus Goliath story, taking on established giants and winning through pure strategy and just sheer audacity.
I mean, ASML's start was incredibly humble. We're talking founded in 1984 in a leaky shed. They were this tiny joint venture going up against Japanese titans like Nikon and Canon. And just 4 years in, they were right on the brink of bankruptcy when one of their parent companies bailed. But two critical things saved them: a crucial partnership with the German optics genius Carl Zeiss, and this unwavering belief that they could innovate faster than anybody else.
And this really gets at a fundamental difference in how they operated. You see, Nikon was like a fortress. They built everything in-house. It made them powerful, for sure, but also really slow. ASML, on the other hand, built this open ecosystem. They partnered with the best in the world for every part, and they even got their customers to share the massive R&D risks with them. And that collaborative model, that became their secret weapon. It's what let them stay agile and eventually outmaneuver their much bigger rivals.
So, outthinking the competition was one thing, but outsmarting physics itself, that was a whole different ballgame. And this next leap, this is how ASML basically cemented its monopoly for good.
By the early 2000s, the entire industry slammed into a brick wall, a physics wall. See, to make smaller transistors, you need light with a shorter wavelength. Simple enough, right? But the next step on the official roadmap, using 157 nanometer light, was a total catastrophic failure. The light itself had become a blunt instrument. It was just too big to draw the tiny fine lines that were needed. Moore's law, the engine of progress for decades, was on the verge of dying.
This right here is where the magic happens. So at its absolute heart, what even is lithography? Well, the best way to think about it is like a projector. But instead of throwing an image up on a movie screen, you're projecting an incredibly tiny, incredibly complex circuit blueprint onto a silicon wafer. It is the foundational process for every single modern chip out there. And that process really boils down to 4 basic steps. First, you coat the wafer with this light-sensitive chemical. It's called a photoresist. Then, you blast it with a pattern of light. Step 3, a developer solution washes away the parts that were exposed, revealing that circuit pattern. And finally, you etch that pattern permanently into the silicon itself. And you do this over and over and over again, sometimes hundreds of times, to build up a chip, layer by tiny layer. But how small can you really go? Well, that is governed by a fundamental law of physics called the Rayleigh criterion. Now, the math can get a little hairy, but the core idea, it's actually super simple. To print smaller, finer details, you need a shorter wavelength of light. It's like you can't draw a super fine line with a thick Sharpie, right? You need a pencil with a razor-sharp point. For decades, the entire semiconductor industry has been on a relentless quest for that sharper pencil. And that quest, well, it has defined the last 50 years of computing. This journey to shrink the actual wavelength of light is, no exaggeration, one of the greatest engineering sagas of our time. And you can see that whole evolution right here. It kicked off in the 80s with mercury lamps, then jumped to powerful excimer lasers in the 90s. By the 2000s, the whole industry had standardized on argon fluoride lasers, sitting at 193 nanometers. They even figured out this super clever trick called immersion to push that tech even further. But just look at that last jump. From 193 nanometers, all the way down to 13.5. That wasn't just another small step. It was a complete revolution. Yeah, before that revolution, engineers came up with this brilliant hack. See, to squeeze every last drop of performance out of those 19.3 nanometer lasers, they put a tiny droplet of ultra-pure water between the final lens and the wafer. Because light travels differently through water, it effectively shortens its wavelength, which let them get a much sharper focus. This one idea, immersion lithography, single-handedly kept Moore's law on track for over a decade. But immersion was pretty much the end of the line for that tech. Physics had thrown up a massive brick wall. See, any light with a wavelength shorter than 193 nanometers gets completely absorbed by glass. You can't make lenses for it. You can't even shine it through the air. So the entire industry was stuck. How on earth do you build a machine that uses light that literally can't pass through anything? Well, the answer was you throw out the old playbook and you completely reinvent the machine. And this brings us to extreme ultraviolet, or EUV lithography. And it all starts by solving that impossible light source problem by basically creating a tiny, contained star inside a box. I mean, the sheer audacity of this solution is just mind-boggling. Inside a perfect vacuum, a massive laser fires 50,000 times a second. Each pulse hits a microscopic droplet of molten tin, vaporizing it instantly. This creates a plasma that is hotter than the surface of the sun, which then explodes in this brilliant flash of pure extreme ultraviolet light. But here's the brutal, brutal reality of that process. For all of that incredible power and complexity, the conversion efficiency is just 0.02%. Let that sink in. That means 99.98% of the energy you pump into the system is just wasted. It's all just heat and other junk. This is why a single EUV machine needs a megawatt of power, enough to run a small neighborhood, just to generate the few hundred watts of light they actually need to print the chips. Okay, so you've managed to create your miniature star. Fantastic. Now, how do you aim its light if you can't use lenses? You have to use mirrors. But not just any mirrors, oh no. You need the most perfect, most reflective surfaces ever created by human hands. And this is the critical point. It's a fundamental shift in how you do optics. The older tech, DUV, it bent light through a whole series of glass lenses. That's called refraction. But EUV light is so high energy, it gets absorbed by literally everything, even air. So no lenses. You have to bounce the light off a series of mirrors, reflection, and the entire path the light travels has to be a near-perfect vacuum. So what kind of mirrors are these? Honestly, they are miracles of material science. Each one is made of up to 50 alternating layers of silicon and molybdenum, and each layer is just a few atoms thick. But here's the catch. Even these incredible mirrors aren't perfect. Each one absorbs about 30% of the light that hits it. So after that light bounces off 10 different mirrors on its way to the wafer, only about 5% of the original light actually makes it. And that right there is why that light source has to be so ridiculously, absurdly powerful to begin with. To really get a sense of the kind of precision we are talking about, just listen to this analogy from Zeiss, the company that makes the mirrors. If you blew one of these mirrors up to the size of Germany, the biggest imperfection, the tallest mountain on its entire surface, would be less than a single millimeter high. It is literally polished to a smoothness that is smaller than an atom, all to make sure that not a single precious photon gets scattered in the wrong direction. Okay, so we have the light source, and we have the impossible optics, but now comes the motion. You have to move the circuit blueprint, the mask, and the silicon wafer in perfect synchronization with a level of precision that is... it's just almost impossible to wrap your head around. Less than half a nanometer. That's the alignment accuracy you need from one layer of a chip to the next. Just for some context, A common virus is about 100 nanometers wide. So you are trying to stack dozens of these intricate patterns right on top of each other, with a precision more than 100 times smaller than a virus. It's just insane. And here's how they pull it off. The machine performs what can only be described as a synchronized dance. The wafer sits on one stage, and the circuit blueprint, called the reticle, sits on another. They move in perfect opposite directions. And because the optical system is shrinking the image down by a factor of 4, the reticle stage has to move at precisely 4 times the speed of the wafer stage. The whole thing is tracked by an array of lasers to maintain that mind-blowing sub-nanometer alignment. Okay, let's put it all together now. We've seen the insane light source, the perfect mirrors, and the precision dance. So let's just walk through the complete sequence of how a single layer of a chip is actually made in one of these things. It's a lot more than just shining a light. First, the wafer gets coated in that photoresist and then gets a little bake. Then it goes into the machine for alignment in the actual exposure. Afterwards, there's a really crucial post-exposure bake to kick off the chemical reaction. Then the developer comes in and washes the pattern clean. Finally, in a totally separate machine, the pattern is etched into the silicon, the leftover resist is stripped away, and it's ready for the next layer. This entire sequence is the heartbeat of the modern world. So from generating a plasma that's hotter than the sun, to bouncing its light off mirrors that are smoother than atoms, to making a wafer and a mask do a perfect dance, this is the physics, the chemistry, and the engineering behind every single chip on this planet. And now that we get how these impossible machines actually work, we can really appreciate what the companies that build them are selling. It isn't just a machine. It's the very foundation of our entire digital civilization. All right, so we've covered the basics of how lithography works. Now it's time to open up the hood on ASML's lineup. We're talking about the most advanced, most complex, and most important machines on the entire planet. So here's the game plan for today. We're going to start with the DUV workhorse, then dive into the absolutely mind-bending EUV revolution, and look ahead to the atomic frontier of High-NA. We'll also cover the software brains behind the brawn, the global ecosystem that makes it all possible, and the wild road to what's next. It's quite a story. First up, let's talk about the machines that print the vast majority of the world's chips, deep ultraviolet or DUV lithography. Honestly, these are the unsung heroes of the tech world. They're the foundation that basically everything else is built on. Okay, so you can see how the DUV family really grew up over time. They started with something called krypton fluoride, or KRF systems, using 248 nanometer light. Then they moved to argon fluoride, or RF, which sharpened the pen to 193 nanometers. But the real magic trick, the thing that squeezed years more life out of this tech, was immersion. With a machine like the NXT 2100i, they put a drop of super pure water between the lens and the wafer. It sounds simple, but that water lets them bend light more sharply, drawing even finer lines with the same color of light. It was a genius move. To make the next generation of chips, the most advanced ones, the industry hit a wall. The problem wasn't the lens or the water anymore. It was the light itself. The pen they were using to draw circuits was just too thick for the tiny details they needed. It was like trying to do microsurgery with a big blunt marker. They needed a whole new kind of light. So, if your pen is too thick, what do? Well, you invent a whole new kind of ink. Or, in this case, a whole new kind of light. This is the solution. A technological leap so huge it took decades to get right. Welcome to the era of extreme ultraviolet, or EUV, and this is where things get, well, cosmic. And just look at the scale of this jump. It's just staggering. We're not just taking a small step down, we're going from 193 nanometer light all the way to 13.5. That's a massive leap. And the crazy part? This new light is so powerful, so energetic, it gets absorbed by literally everything. Even air, so you can't just shine it through water anymore. You have to create a tiny, controlled star inside a perfect vacuum, and you have to do it 50,000 times a second. And once they tamed this starlight, the evolution of the machine, the NXE series, was just breathtaking. I mean, check this out. Back in 2010, the first one was basically a science project, printing just 5 wafers an hour. Fast forward to 2023, and the latest model is a full-blown manufacturing beast pushing out 220 wafers an hour. This machine, this is what makes the 7, 5, and 3 nanometer chips in your phone and computer possible. Of course, taming starlight doesn't come cheap. Not even close. And this chart really tells that story. The price just skyrockets with each new generation. And you gotta understand, this isn't just inflation. This price tag is a direct measure of the sheer monumental difficulty of the physics problems they had to solve. Every leap in what these machines can do basically meant doubling the cost. So how do you even steer a light that gets absorbed by everything? Well, you can't use lenses. You need mirrors. But not the kind of mirrors you have in your bathroom. Oh no. These mirrors, made with their partner Zeiss, are the flattest, most perfect surfaces humans have ever created. I mean, get this. If you scaled one up to the size of Germany, the biggest imperfection would be less than 1/10 of a millimeter. It's mind-bending stuff. But just when you think you've conquered physics, it throws you another curveball, a really sneaky one this time. See, when you're drawing circuits that are just a few atoms wide, the light itself starts to get fuzzy. Photons arrive randomly, like raindrops, and a few stray photons can totally ruin your pattern. They call this stochastic effects, and it's the next great enemy of Moore's law. So how do you fight the randomness of the universe itself? Well, you build a bigger, better, and even more precise machine. This is the next generation, High-NA EUV. These things, the XXE series, are so massive and intricate, they're really more like cathedrals. Cathedrals blow up to worship light. The secret sauce here is something called anamorphic optics. It's a ridiculously clever solution. To get higher resolution, you need to collect light from wider angles, which means huge mirrors. But huge angled mirrors would normally distort the image. So Zeiss came up with a system that squishes the image differently on each axis, 4 times one way, 8 times the other. It's like a funhouse mirror in reverse, designed to undistort the image, letting them hit an incredible 0.55 numerical aperture and print features just 8 nanometers wide. And when I say this is a whole new beast, I am not exaggerating. Just look at these numbers. The weight jumps to 165 tons. That's heavier than a Boeing 757. The power consumption is insane, and it can take up to 2 years, just to install one of these things. We're talking about machines that push the absolute limits of what a factory can even handle. And then there's the price tag. We're talking about almost $400 million for one machine. That's more than the GDP of some countries. So why would anyone pay that? Because this machine is the key. It's the only key that unlocks the door to the next decade of technology, to the AI, the computing, the communications of the future. Okay, so we've talked about the incredible hardware, the sheer brawn of these machines, but that's only half the picture. The real magic, the thing that nobody can copy, is the brains, the unseen intelligence that guides every single photon. This is such a profound idea. They call it holistic lithography. It's what turns this giant, hulking piece of metal into something that's, well, almost alive. It's a self-correcting, learning organism. The hardware gives you the potential for precision, but it's the software that actually achieves it. So how does it work? It's this beautiful, constant feedback loop. Before it even starts, the system measures the wafer for any tiny imperfections. Then, super powerful software predicts how the light will behave and actually pre-distorts the pattern on the mask to cancel out errors before they happen. Then it exposes the wafer. And right after, another tool measures the result down to the nanometer. That data gets fed right back into the system to make the next wafer even better. It's a cycle. Measure, predict, expose, learn. Over and over and over. And this entire ecosystem of software and sensors, this is the real competitive moat. It creates this incredibly powerful data lock-in. The longer a fab uses ASML's machines, the more data they collect, the more they learn, and the smarter and more efficient the whole factory becomes. It's a virtuous cycle you just can't break into from the outside. So you might be thinking, how on earth does one company do all this? Well, the short answer is they don't, not alone. ASML sits at the center of a global network of partners who are just as indispensable as they are. And here's the crazy part. Look at these partners. Each one is basically a monopolist in its own field. Zeiss in Germany is the only company on Earth that can make the optics. Zymer in the US is the only one that makes the light source. Trumpf, another German company, makes the unique lasers for that source. There is no plan B. This isn't just a supply chain. It's a global dream team. So what you're really looking at is this incredible web that connects the world's deepest pockets of scientific genius, from the Netherlands to Germany to the US to Belgium. And the customers, the big guys like TSMC, Intel, and Samsung, they're not just buyers, they're investors. They're literally co-funding the R&D to make sure the machines they'll need in 5 or 10 years actually get invented. Okay, so High-NA is just now arriving in the world's most advanced factories. But ASML, they're already deep into working on what comes next. And trust me, the road ahead gets even crazier. Beyond High-NA, the next stop on the roadmap is something called Hyper-NA. We're talking about a future machine with an even higher numerical aperture, aiming for a stunning 4.5 nanometer resolution. But the challenges are just immense. They'll probably need 1,000-watt light sources, totally new mirror designs, and a price tag that could easily top $500 million for each machine. But hey, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before we can even really dream about Hyper-NA, there's a whole laundry list of really tough problems to solve just for the current High-NA machines. They need new light-sensitive materials to fight that quantum noise, new protective covers for the masks that won't just melt, and they need to figure out how to stitch patterns together with an accuracy of less than a nanometer. These are fundamental physics challenges that still need to be cracked. So when you put it all together, what you have is a company whose engineering literally defines the frontier of the digital world. These cathedrals of light make everything possible. But when one company holds the keys to the future, that power doesn't just stay in the clean room. It becomes a central piece on the global chessboard, shaping policy and the fate of nations.
It's pretty wild when you think about it. In the global race for tech supremacy, you've got superpowers, you've got massive armies, and then you have a quiet town in the Netherlands called Veldhoven. Because from this one place, a single company controls the machines that literally decide who can and who cannot build the world's most advanced chips.
100%. No, that's not a typo. That is ASML's total monopoly on the one technology, EUV lithography, that matters for the cutting edge. So if you want to make the chips that power, well, everything from AI to your country's defense systems, you have to go through them. There is no plan B. Period.
So in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how this happened. We'll start with how they won the race so decisively there's no runner-up. Then we'll dive into the tech choke point they control. We'll unpack the whole geopolitical drama playing out between Washington, The Hague, and Beijing. We'll look at the scramble for a plan B, and finally see why the whole world now depends on this one small town.
To really get a grip on ASML's power, you first have to look at the competition they just left in the dust. And look, this wasn't a slow victory. This was one company making a massive, unbelievably risky bet that paid off on a global scale. It didn't just win the race, it pretty much ended it.
Now, take a look at this. At first glance, you see ASML with over 60% of the entire market. That's huge. But honestly, even that number is misleading. Because if we're talking about the most advanced segment, the EUV machines that make the most powerful chips, that bar for ASML is at 100%. The others, they're not even in the picture.
So, the big question is, how did this happen? I mean, Japanese giants like Nikon and Canon used to dominate this field. What went wrong for them? Well, it all came down to a critical fork in the road back in the 2010s. You could either play it safe and keep stretching the older DUV technology, or you could take this colossal leap of faith into the great unknown with EUV. Nikon and Canon played it safe. ASML, they bet the entire company on EUV. And by the time everybody else figured out that EUV was the only way forward, it was just too late. ASML was already a decade ahead.
And this table just lays it all out perfectly. You've got ASML playing in the big leagues, focused on the absolute cutting edge. Then you have Nikon and Canon, who are basically stuck selling older systems for less advanced chips. The kind you find in your car or your microwave. And then there's SMEE in China. They're making a serious state-backed push, but they're still about a decade behind ASML's older DUV tech, and that's not even touching EUV. They're just not in the same league.
Okay, so this brings us to the real heart of the matter. It's one thing to be ahead in a race. It's something else entirely to have a monopoly that is for all practical purposes unbreakable. ASML's position isn't just about a smart business decision. It's about building a technological fortress so complex that no company or even country can build its own.
This whole monopoly really rests on 4 pillars. First, you've got mirrors from Carl Zeiss in Germany. These things are literally the flattest surfaces ever made by humans, and Zeiss only sells them to ASML. Second, the light source from Cymer in the US, a system that vaporizes tiny drops of tin with a laser. Insane. Third, just the sheer mind-bending complexity of putting it all together. And fourth, a fortress of patents that just locks everyone else out.
And this quote right here, it just nails it. You can't just throw a few $1 billion at this problem and hope to build a competitor. ASML isn't really a single company. It's more like the final assembly point for a global network of one-of-a-kind suppliers. Trying to recreate that from scratch? Yeah, good luck. It'd be like trying to build an entire rainforest.
And get this, the numbers for just one of these machines they're just staggering. It weighs 180 tons, takes 3 jumbo jets to ship it. The mirrors have layers that are just a few atoms thick. The light source alone is almost half the cost of the entire machine. And the price for one? Over $200 million. This isn't just a piece of equipment, it's a wonder of modern engineering.
So when you have this kind of absolute technological power, it's only a matter of time before the politicians come knocking. And that's exactly what happened. ASML has been dragged, pretty unwillingly, from the world of physics right into the middle of geopolitics. It's now a central pawn in the high-stakes chess match between the US and China. Just look at how fast this all went down. It really kicked off in 2019, when the US leaned on the Dutch government to block an EUV sale to China's top chipmaker, SMIC. Then, in 2022, Washington went bigger, banning not just EUV, but also the best DUV machines. By 2023, the Netherlands made its own rules that mirrored the US ones. The result? Well, it was a mad dash from Chinese companies to buy everything they could before the door slammed shut for good.
And here's the wild part. The result of that mad dash. In late 2023, with all these new restrictions in place, China became ASML's single biggest market, almost half of their sales. So you have to ask, how is that even possible? If you're trying to stop them from buying these machines, how did they end up buying more than anyone else on the planet?
Well, the answer is this thing called front-loading. It's simple, really. Chinese companies saw the writing on the wall. They knew the window to buy was closing fast, so they went on an epic shopping spree. They bought every single DUV machine they could get their hands on to stockpile for the future. It's a classic case of unintended consequences. Sanctions meant to slow China down actually triggered a record-breaking sales boom for ASML.
So you can just imagine the impossible position this puts ASML's CEO, Christophe Fouquet, in. This quote from him just says it all. At the end of the day, ASML is a Dutch company, and it's absolutely vital to the European economy. But it's also a crucial partner to the United States. So Fouquet is constantly walking this political tightrope, trying to serve his company's interests, while being squeezed by his most powerful allies.
Okay, so naturally, with one company holding all the cards, you've got the rest of the world desperately trying to figure out an alternative. The big question is, what are the chances that someone, somewhere, can actually develop a plan B and break this monopoly? Well, when you actually look at the potential replacements, the picture gets pretty clear pretty fast. On one side, you've got ASML's EUV, which is proven, mature, and churning out billions of chips right now. And on the other side, you have things like nano-imprint lithography and directed self-assembly. They're scientifically really cool for sure, but they are nowhere near ready for prime time. They're just too slow, too niche. They might someday help out, but replace EUV? No way.
And really, the bottom line from just about every expert is this. For at least the next decade, maybe longer, there is no substitute for what ASML does. All roads to the future of computing, whether it's AI, quantum, you name it, they all run through Veldhoven. The monopoly is secure.
So this reality, this unshakable fact, forces every major power to build its entire tech strategy around this one company. It's a global chessboard, and ASML sits right in the middle of it. Let's take a quick look at how the different players are forced to make their moves. This chart lays out the game perfectly. The US wants to use ASML as a tool to contain China. The EU is trying to protect its golden goose while also being a good ally. China is in a desperate race to become independent before it gets totally cut off. And then you have Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. Their economies are built on this stuff, and they're just trying to keep access and not get caught in the crossfire. Everybody needs ASML, but they all want something different and conflicting from it. And that right there is the ultimate takeaway. It doesn't matter if you're making decisions in Washington, Beijing, Brussels, or Taipei. Your national strategy for the 21st century, whether you like it or not, runs directly through a small town in the Netherlands. ASML has become the accidental and all-powerful gatekeeper to the future. So you have this incredible story where physics and politics collide, where a tech monopoly becomes a geopolitical weapon. But underneath all of that, there's another story, and it's just as fascinating. It's the story of the financial engine and the insane innovation cycle that keeps this whole thing going.
All right, welcome to the final chapter of our deep dive into ASML. We've gone through the mind-bending physics and the high-stakes geopolitics. But now we're going inside the machine itself, the financial fortress, to see what makes this company one of the most powerful and profitable on Earth. You know, this really gets to the heart of it all. It's one thing to build an incredible piece of technology. It's another thing entirely to build a business around it that's this profitable, this resilient. ASML isn't just selling a product. They are the gatekeeper, the critical choke point for our entire digital world. And that position is unbelievably valuable. So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the financial engine. Then, we'll see how it handles the wild ride of the chip cycle. After that, we'll dissect its impenetrable competitive moat. We'll also look at the potential risks, the cracks in the armor. And finally, we'll look forward to their 2030 outlook. Let's dive in. All right, first up, the core of the whole operation, the financial engine. I mean, how does a company like this actually generate so much value? Well, it really comes down to two incredibly powerful pillars. Okay, so you've got two main ways ASML makes money. The big one, about 77%, is pretty straightforward. They sell the new machines. But the secret sauce, the real key to their stability, is that second pillar, installed base management. Just think of it as high-margin, recurring revenue from servicing and upgrading the thousands of machines already out there. It's the gift that just keeps on giving. And the scale of this whole thing is just staggering. Last year, the company pulled in over 28 billion euros in revenue. That single number tells you just how absolutely essential ASML is to, well, pretty much everything. But, revenue is only half the story. The really wild part is the profitability. A gross margin over 51% for a company that makes hardware? That's insane. You just don't see that. Those are the kinds of numbers you'd expect from a software giant, not a company building city block-sized machines. It's a direct result of being a monopoly. You can set the price. And all that financial power creates this incredible stability. I mean, get this. ASML has an order backlog of 30 billion euros. That's more than a full year of sales already locked in. Talk about visibility. On top of that, it's spinning off 9.5 billion in free cash flow. That's just pure cash firepower to invest, innovate, and reward investors. And this isn't some flash in the pan. Just look at the last 10 years. This story here is one of steady, relentless compounding. Revenue, margins, cash flow, it's all just beautifully marching up and to the right. This is not a company that has wild swings. It's a machine for methodically building value year after year. So how do you protect an engine like this? Well, you have to keep feeding it. Just last year, ASML pumped 4.3 billion euros back into R&D. They're in a never-ending race against the laws of physics, and they spend billions just to make sure they're the only ones winning. Now, all that financial strength is absolutely crucial for this next part, weathering the storm. The semiconductor industry is notorious for its brutal boom and bust cycles. So how on earth does ASML not just survive them, but actually seem to thrive in them? This chart really says it all. Look back at the 2008 financial crisis. Global spending in the chip industry absolutely cratered, falling by 35%. ASML's revenue, it only dropped by 15%. And fast forward to the more recent downturn, a 30% industry drop versus just an 8% dip for ASML. This company is just built differently. And that resilience is why this quote is so true. That massive backlog we talked about, it acts like a giant shock absorber. Chipmakers can't just cancel orders they placed years ago. And all the while, that steady, high-margin service revenue just keeps flowing in. Good times and bad. It's an incredibly powerful combination. Okay, so this resilience isn't an accident. It's part of a much larger defense system. It all adds up to one of the widest competitive moats you'll find anywhere. You can think of it like a fortress with 5 distinct layers of walls protecting the castle. So let's run through these layers. First, the obvious one, a pure technological monopoly. They're the only game in town for EUV. Second, unmatched scale. Nobody else can build these things at this level. Third, deep customer lock-in. Their clients are basically partners. Fourth, an exclusive supplier network they've built over decades. And finally, a regulatory shield, where geopolitics actually helps them out. Let's just focus on that customer lock-in for a second, because it's a huge one. This isn't like switching your brand of soda. Fabs like TSMC and Intel literally design their entire multi-billion-dollar factories around ASML's tools. If they wanted to switch, they'd have to re-engineer everything. We're talking about shutting down production for over a year, costing them €500 million or more. It's just not going to happen. And that moat doesn't stop at ASML's front door. It extends out to this incredible web of over 800 suppliers. Key partners like Zeiss, the only people on Earth who can make these flawless mirrors, and Cymer, who developed the light source, they are exclusively tied to ASML. So to compete with ASML, you wouldn't just have to build a machine, you'd have to build an entire industrial universe from scratch. Of course, this all sounds a little too perfect, right? No fortress is truly invincible. So let's play devil's advocate for a minute and take a hard look at the real risks that ASML is facing. You've really got two major external pressures. On one side, you have geopolitics. Export controls, especially to China, cut off a massive potential market. That hurts. On the other side, you have customer concentration. When just a few giants like TSMC, Samsung, and Intel make up most of your sales, their fate becomes your fate. If they have a bad year, you feel it. But ASML isn't just sitting back and hoping for the best. They actively manage these risks. The hit from China export controls, it's cushioned by that huge backlog and new demand from fabs popping up in the US and Europe. The risk from customer cycles, it's softened by all that recurring service revenue. They are constantly reinforcing the walls of the fortress. So, with a clear picture of its strengths and its potential weaknesses, where does this ship go from here? Let's turn to the final question. What's the outlook to 2030? Well, management has actually laid out a pretty clear map for us. Starting from where they are today, their base case sees revenue climbing to around 48 billion euros by 2030. If things go really well, driven by AI, that could hit 60 billion. And even in their bear case, their worst case scenario, they still see significant growth to 44 billion. The direction of travel is pretty clear. And what's going to get them there? Well, they have some serious long-term tailwinds at their back. You've got the shift to the next generation High-NA machines for AI chips. You have the whole industry moving toward complex 3D chip designs. You have that high-margin service business that just keeps growing. And you have this global push to build new fabs everywhere. All of these roads lead right back to ASML. And that really brings us to the fundamental question. What's the end game here? It's not about hitting next quarter's sales numbers. The entire strategy, everything they do, is geared toward one single goal: maintaining and strengthening their position as the one indispensable bottleneck in the most important industry of our time. And in the end, that's what this has all been about. To really understand this one company is to understand this incredible point where everything converges: the most advanced physics, the highest stakes in global politics, and the massive flow of capital that powers our modern world. It is, quite literally, the choke point of progress itself.